thank you very much, everyone, for attending this seminar. We're going to spend some time today talking about the E-2 visa requirements and also take a look at some of the E-2 visa renewal considerations. A few of the things that I'm going to go over before we actually get started. So as some of you may know, that the firm was founded on an E-2 visa, and it was founded on an E-2 visa around 8 years ago. And I'm personally in the US on an E-2 visa, so I have a pretty good idea of what you're going through. And we've renewed the E-2 visa. The firm has renewed the E-2 visa once, so we'll also be happy to share our experiences the experiences that we went through during that renewal process. The firm is Scott Legal, and we're a full service immigration firm, but we focus primarily on E-2 visas. We process hundreds of E-2 visas, and typically we focus on E-2 visas where the dollar amount is low. So a lot of the time those cases are higher risk than when the dollar amount or the investment amount is a lot higher. But we processed E-2 visas all over the world, but the two consulates that we focus on, or a lot of our applications tend to go to, are the U.S. consulate in London and the U.S. consulate in Toronto. In terms of going forward, we're going to continue this webinar series. We're going to have a couple of webinars every month. In terms of after the webinar, a few things that we're going to send to everybody. The first thing is that you will receive a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, so that will be sent to you. Another thing that you're going to receive that we advertise when we set up the webinar is we have an E-2 visa guide, which is a comprehensive guide that kind of goes through all of the E-2 visa requirements, over 20 pages, and really discusses things in a lot of detail. We're also going to send that to you. And then finally, we're going to send you a link to where you can sign up for additional seminars. So for example, we have a webinar that we're doing next week on the people who are on an E-2 and they want to go to a green card, and what some of the considerations are and what some of the options are for that. So in terms of the panelists, we are very, very lucky today to have Kelly Legrand-Wiener and Michaela Brazdova. Kelly is the managing attorney at Scott Legal, and Michaela is an associate at Scott Legal. The two of them combined have processed hundreds of E-2 visas and have a wealth of knowledge in this area. So we're really lucky to have them. And myself, I'm Ian Scott. I'm the founder of the firm, and I'll be the moderator. If you have questions, then you can just send those questions through the Q&A or chat function, and we will definitely get to them. We've saved some time at the end for questions, but also as we go through, we'll be answering some of the questions as we go through. And some people had sent in questions in advance as well, so we'll be answering those as we go through the webinar. So, and finally, the webinar will be recorded, so you will be able to kind of watch it later. We'll give you details with respect to how to access the webinar on demand. So without further ado, we will turn it over to Michaela.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So as Ian mentioned, I'm an associate attorney at Scott Legal, and I focus my practice on the E-2 investor visa and E-1 treaty trader visa, but I also process different types of non-immigrant and immigrant visa applications. So today I will go over some basic overview of the E-2 visa and some basic rules and regulations about the E-2 visa. So the E-2 visa is a non-immigrant visa that allows you to come to the US and develop a direct E-2 company in which you have invested money. So there are two ways how you can obtain an E-2 visa. So one way how you can get an E-2 visa is to purchase an already kind of existing and running company. So this could be, for example, purchase of a franchise, or purchase of an already running restaurant, or a different type of company. And the second way how you can get an E-2 visa is that you can start your own business in the US. So you can set up your own business entity, your own company, and then manage this company in the US. So to qualify for an E-2 visa, you must be a national of an E-2 visa country. So there are many countries from all over the world are on the list of the E-2 countries. And, countries, for example, from Europe, Africa, Asia, Latin America are on the list of countries. So just to provide some examples, countries like Canada, UK, Italy, Mexico, Japan, Thailand are all E2 visa treaty countries. A common question we get from potential clients is how long they can stay in the US on the E2 visa. And so this will depend on which national of which country you are, because different countries have kind of different rules guiding how long you can stay in the US. So some nationals of certain countries can stay in the US on an E2 visa for up to 2 years. Then nationals of different countries can be issued an E2 visa up to 5 years. So this will depend on national of which country you are. And now I will go.
So one question for you, Michaela, that came in has to do with the living in the particular country, and the question is, can someone apply for an E2 visa if they don't live in the country that they have a passport from?
Yeah, so in most of the cases, yes, but the UK is one country that kind of requires, to qualify for an E2 visa. It's not sufficient that you are a national of the UK, but you must also be residing in the UK. And so we usually submit evidence such as, for example, lease agreement, utility bills. If you own a property in the UK, we can submit evidence of that to kind of show that you are residing in the UK. And one thing to realize is that just because you have left the UK for a couple months, and let's say you are currently living somewhere else, or you're just kind of traveling all over the world, like that is fine. If you have lived in the UK or your whole life, and just in the past couple months you have been living somewhere else, that is fine, and you could still qualify for the E2 visa. But UK is the only country that has this special requirement, and other countries don't have these requirements. So as long as you have a passport of the E2 country, you could qualify for an E2 visa.
Perfect. No, that's great. And then the other question, this is my question, and this one I know the answer to, but I want the audience to kind of have a good understanding is, what would you say the breakdown that you talked about, the two different ways to get an E2 visa, starting a business and buying a business? What do we normally see in terms of what's the breakdown of percentage breakdown that we normally see?
Yeah, I would say most of the people start their own company in the US. So I would say maybe around like 75 to 80% of people start their own business in the US, and maybe 20 to 25% of people purchase a franchise or an already existing company, running company in the US. But it definitely, most of the people kind of set up their own business in the US.
Perfect. And the last question that I have, and either Kelly or Michaela, you can answer this question, is the time that you've listed there, 3 months to 5 years. So what does someone do when they what does someone, like, there's a country, you said it's based on country. So if a particular country only has 3 months, like what do they do? Because it seems like a really low amount of time.
Yeah, so the 3 months is basically just validity of the E2 visa. But every time an E2 investor comes to the US, the E2 investor is granted 2 years in an E2 status. So let's say there is a country that issues a E2 visa that is valid for 3 months. That is completely fine. The E2 investor can enter the US on the E2 visa, and then once the person enters the US, they can stay in the US for up to 2 years. And then once they leave, they have to renew the visa.
Excellent. No, great. Thank you. Perfect. We'll move to the next slide.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, kind of the most important requirement is that you are a national of a country that qualifies for the E2 visa. And then the second E2 visa requirement is that you must make an investment in the US. And important thing to realize here is that the money you are investing must be at risk. And this means that you have already spent the money on an E2 investment in the US. So let's say you are starting your own company, then this requirement means that you have already purchased everything that is necessary to kind of set up the business. So you have prepaid the kind of like the lease. You have bought all the equipment you need. You have bought all the inventory, and you have kind of already spent money on the E2 expenditures to get the business running. And if you are buying an E2 business in the US, the at-risk requirement means that you have already transferred the purchase price either to the seller or to an escrow agent. So if you're buying a business in the US, I will just quickly go over this. You can transfer the money. You can use an escrow and transfer the money to an escrow agent. And once the E2 visa is granted, then the escrow agent will transfer the money to the seller. And this is just a kind of like a mechanism, so in case the E2 visa is not granted, you don't lose all the purchase price money, but you transfer it to the escrow agent, and then the agent will transfer it to the seller once the E2 visa is granted. But an important thing to realize here is that at the time you are applying for the E2 visa, you must have invested the money in the US, because there is a common kind of misconception, or many people think that if they apply for the E2 visa, kind of allows them to come to the US, explore kind of their investment opportunities, and once they are in the US, then they will kind of decide what business they want to set up, and then they will invest the money. But that's not the case. And at the time you are applying for an E2 visa, you will really have to demonstrate that you have spent the money in the US. You have kind of bought everything that is necessary to start the E2 business, and that is very important requirement about the in the E2 visa. When you are investing the money in the US as a part of the E2 application, you will have to show where is the money you are investing coming from. So this is called kind of a source of funds requirement, and the government basically wants to see that the money you'll be investing in the US doesn't come from illegal or criminal activity. So some common sources of funds are, for example, that the money is coming from your personal savings from employment, or from money you received from the sale of your house, or the money is coming from a gift. I would say these are the most common sources of funds for the E2 visa. And you will have to submit evidence about the source of funds, and the evidence will be kind of different for different sources of funds. But for example, if the money is coming from your personal savings from employment, then you would have to submit 2 or 3 years of your tax returns just to show that you earned the money, you pay taxes on the money, and that will be kind of the documentation you would need to submit in that case. I wanted to just kind of quickly list some typical E2 expenditures when, in case you are starting your own business in the US. So some typical E2 expenditures are, for example, inventory in case you will be selling products in the US. Then any kind of equipment, office equipment, or any equipment you need. So those could be, computers, phones, printers, scanners, kind of furniture to furnish the office. Then you could also invest money, to set up your website, or to pay, marketing company for any marketing materials you need. Then, money to buy any kind of softwares or licenses you need. So these would be kind of the most typical E2 expenditures. And as I mentioned before, in case you are purchasing an E2 business, obviously the kind of like the E2 expenditure would be the purchase price for a business.
Sure. So just it's as questions come in, sometimes they come in and we won't. I'm not answering them just because I know that they might be covered later in the presentation. But one question that just came in that is very relevant to this section, with someone asked a bank certificate or credit, a bank certificate of credit, a source of proof. And I think what the question is, and you can rephrase it if this isn't what the question is, but if you get some type of a loan from a bank,
Mhm.
what do you have to provide? And I'll let you describe,
Yeah,
Michaela.
yeah. So loan can definitely be a source for the E2 investment money. An important thing with loan is that the loan cannot be secured by the assets of the E2 company, and but can be secured, for example, by your house or anything else, just not by the assets of the E2 business. And usually with loans is that we submit kind of agreement, the loan agreement, with the bank, with kind of like the signatures, and that's usually, and then kind of like the transfer of money, onto your account, and that's usually sufficient evidence to prove the source of funds.
Perfect. Great. Thank you.
So then another E2 requirement is that the E2 business cannot be marginal. And so what this means is that the E2 business has to have either a present or future capacity to employ US employees. And when I say future capacity, it means that the E2 business must be kind of capable of employing US employees in the next 5 years. And we'll go over this requirement in more detail on the next slide. And
One question that came in, Michaela, is in relation in particular to the fact that the majority of the companies are startup versus purchase business purchases. And do you have to have an employee right when you apply for the E2?
no, so you don't have to. In most cases, it's very helpful for the application. If let's say you are abroad and you are applying for the E2 visa at a consulate, it's usually very helpful if you already have someone in the US employed who is already kind of running the business. But it's not a requirement, so you don't have to. But if it's possible, we kind of especially if there is some weaker aspect in the application, we usually advise that if it's possible to kind of already have an employee in the US, but it's not a requirement.
Great, thank you.
So then another E2 requirement is that the E2 business must be real and operating. And so what this means is that the E2 company has to already be kind of up and running and providing product, kind of selling products or providing services to customers, or it must be kind of like very close to starting. So in case you are purchasing an E2 business, then the company would already be kind of like up and running, and then kind of like evidence to show that it's real and operating would be to submit, for example, the company's bank statements to show that the company is taking revenue, is taking money from clients or customers. Or you could submit payroll or pay stubs to show that you already have employees. You could submit, for example, contracts with clients to show that the company is real and operating, meaning that it already has clients. So in case you are purchasing a business and the company is already providing services, it's usually very easy to show that the company is real and operating. And in case you are kind of starting up your own company, you are outside the US and you don't have any employees in the US, then the evidence how you can show that the company is kind of really close to starting is, for example, you could submit signed lease agreement to show that once the company already has an office space and the office space is paid for. Or you could submit evidence, showing that the business entity is set up, the business bank account has been set up, that you have, invested all the money you need to invest in the US. You could submit evidence, that the company has a website, has kind of marketing materials ready. And if you have any contracts with clients before, you come to the US, you could definitely submit those. Those would be very helpful. Or if you don't have necessarily contracts with clients, you could definitely submit, letters of intent from potential clients saying that, as soon as you kind of like come to the US and start operating the E2 company, the clients will be, kind of like ready to cooperate with the company. So that's kind of the evidence we usually submit when the E2 investor is outside the US and the company hasn't started taking revenue in the US yet. So then the next E2 requirement.
Sorry, Michaela, just one question that just came in that's relevant to what you just went over. It's two questions, so one of them I'm just going to answer with a yes, and then I'll put the other piece for you to answer. But the question is part-time or full-time employees and how many. The second part of the question says, secondly, does the business have to be a registered US entity? So we'll just, for the purposes of our discussion, we will just say yes. It can be a sole proprietorship, but we'll just say yes for the purpose of the discussion. So if you could just comment on the other part of the question, Michaela.
Yeah, so we generally advise that the E2 company has 3 or 4 full-time employees by year 5 of operations. So you don't have to hire all 3 or 4 employees immediately when you kind of like come to the US and start running the E2 company, but in order for you to renew the E2 visa, the ideal case would be 3 or 4 full-time and W2 employees. And I think Kelly will go over this in more detail later about kind of COVID and its kind of impact on how many employees should the business have, because obviously that kind of changed the situation a little bit. But yeah, the general advice is 3 or 4 full-time employees by year 5 of operations.
I think you're muted, Ian.
Sorry about that. So yeah, just in terms of the full-time is kind of like more of like a full-time equivalent. So you can have two people that are working 20 hours a week that would be the same as one full-time person, but that would count as one employee, like one person for the purposes of full-time. So
yeah. So then
sorry.
Sorry,
Michaela, you muted you instead of myself.
Okay. So then the next E2 requirement is that you must be coming to the US to develop and direct the E2 business. So, because you invested in the E2 business, the government wants to see that, the purpose of why you are coming to the US is to kind of manage the operations of the E2 business. And you should, as an E2 investor, you should kind of really focus on the high level, managerial and executive duties when running the E2 company. So, that could be, for example, hiring or training employees, kind of day-to-day overseeing of the business, taking care of the business development, overseeing the company's financials, negotiating with, your business partners or suppliers. So as an E2 investor, you should limit kind of like the amount of, kind of like work you do for the E2 business. So let's say you have, for example, a consulting company, your focus should be on high level executive and managerial duties, and not really to kind of like be a consultant and providing consulting services to the customers. Of course, you can still do that, but you should have other employees who will also be doing that. Otherwise, the government, may argue that, the E2 visa is not kind of like a suitable option for you. And important thing in the kind of like the development direct is that many people are concerned whether they need kind of like a prior experience in running a business, to qualify for the E-2 visa. And it's definitely helpful if you have prior experience in running company in your home country or somewhere else, but it's definitely not required. And we have many clients who who worked abroad for some company, and they have always had this dream of setting up their own company in the US, and they were still granted the E-2 visa. What we usually do is we try to connect kind of like your prior work experience and explain that even though you don't have kind of necessarily an experience in running a business, you are well qualified to actually do it. Then the next E-2 visa requirement is that you must own at least 50% in the E-2 company. So this is a very important requirement, and you must own 50% in the E-2 company at the time you are applying for the E-2 visa. But you must also, your ownership can never fall below the 50%. So it's important thing to keep in mind. Once the E-2 visa is granted, that your ownership always has to stay at least 50%. And you may have you may have another business partner who will own the other 50% or 40%, and that's completely fine. But you must keep at least 50% to kind of show that you can make decisions on behalf of the company, and you can you can manage and develop and direct the E-2 company in the US. And the last E-2 visa requirement is that you must have intent to return to your home country once your E-2 visa expires. And this requirement, this is a requirement because the E-2 visa is a non-immigrant visa. So that's why the government wants to see that you will come back to you will return to your home country once the E-2 visa expires. But on the other hand, you may renew the E-2 visa indefinitely as long as you meet all the E-2 visa requirements. So in the next slide, I will go over the E-2
So we
invest.
just have one question that came in related to and I know that there are quite a few questions. So, but some of them we will get to another slide. So if but this one relates to the slide. It's has to do with what if there is a green card application in process when someone's applying for an E-2?
Yeah, so so it will depend, what's kind of like the priority date of the green card application. So, let's say your family member sponsored you for a green card, filed the I-130 petition a couple of years ago, but your priority date, it will not be kind of current, for 5 more years. In that case, I don't think that the kind of like the green card, the filed green card would be an issue. But let's say, your spouse filed a green card petition for you, and for some reason you want to apply or you want to renew your E-2 visa. Then the pending green card could definitely be an issue. So it'll kind of depend on what's the situation, and mostly on what's the priority date for the green card petition.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And we were very lucky once we had an E-2 applicant that we processed, and we explained it to them before, because they had a category where they were eligible for the green card within 2 years. And they were from a country where they issued the visa for 5 years, but the consulate didn't ask about it and approve the visa. The other thing I'll just quickly answer, because the question, I didn't read the whole question, but the question did ask about perm as well. And perm, if a perm is filed, I think that it's going to have little effect on the E-2 visa. I think that you start to run into the similar questions or issues that Michaela mentioned if the I-140 has been filed, and certainly if I-485 has been filed. So as you're further along the process, I think that could, so it still will depend on the facts and circumstances, but the mere filing of a perm, I think that's an E2, it's not going to impact. Perfect. So Mikhail, you can move on to investment, the topic everybody loves.
Yeah, so this is very, very common question we get. And the question is, how much money do I have to invest in the US so my E2 petition is approved? And unfortunately, there is no kind of like minimum set amount, and the immigration regulations kind of don't set up any amount that would say that, if you invest this amount of money, your E2 petition will, be 100% approved. So instead, what the government uses, they use what's called a proportionality test, when they basically look at how much money you have invested in your business and on how much money is usually objectively required to be invested for that type of business. So that's why the investment amount will be kind of different for different types of businesses. So for example, if you are starting a service-oriented business like a consulting company, then, as I mentioned, the typical E2 expenditures would be, getting an office space, getting any computer equipment or office equipment you need. You could include expenditures you spend for the business entity setup, some legal expenses. You would probably have to buy some licenses, softwares, and things like that. But in this case, the investment could be around $40,000, and you spend everything what you needed to spend, and the company is ready to start the operations. And on the other hand, if you are, for example, starting a car manufacturing factory or company, you would have to rent a huge factory space or a huge space. You would have to buy all the machines, all the equipment. So in that case, you would probably have to invest $1 million or probably a couple millions of dollars. So that's why the kind of like the amount that needs to be invested will be different in depending on what type of business you are starting. And the government will basically look at how much money you have spent, and then they will look at objective evidence of how much money is usually required to be spent. So we usually kind of proactively submit evidence like business articles that say, consulting companies usually have to invest this amount of money, and then we kind of compare it with what you spent and present it to the government as an evidence that you invest all the money you needed to invest, to kind of satisfy the substantiality requirement. And I would say if you invest, let's say you are starting the consulting company and the evidence is around $40,000. Let's say you found a business article that says, consulting companies have to invest, $45,000. So in that case, we generally recommend that you spend kind of like 100% of the objective evidence kind of like amount to show that you kind of really invested everything you need to start the business. But on the other hand, let's say you are kind of like starting the car manufacturing factory or company, and you find, like objective evidence that, normally you have to invest $1 million, but you only invested, let's say $850,000, because the investment amount is so high. We could try to make an argument that, you invested most of what is required to start that type of business. So it will depend, what business you are investing into and what's kind of the investment amount.
Perfect. And there were a number of questions that had to do with the investment amount, and in particular for consulting and service-oriented businesses. And one in particular, which was, I found it an interesting question. It was, How much do I have to invest to start a law firm? That actually was a question. Um, yes, how much would establishing a law firm require for E2 purposes? And it's an interesting question because, as we mentioned at the beginning, that this law firm was started on an E2 visa. So our experience was something that we don't do often anymore. So we to start the law firm, I spent $15,000 and then put around $35,000 or $40,000 in a bank account, and and went to Toronto, and the application was approved. But we tend to not see applications like that very often. We the odd time we can still do it if it's a, kind of maybe a very specific business type, like we had a doctor once that was opening up a doctor's office and spent very little. But maybe just to round out this point, Michaela, what are kind of, with low investment amount, what are some of the other things that can assist with a low investment amount?
Yeah, so if you are investing, low amount in the business, then it it may be helpful that you already have, employees in the U.S. at the time you are applying for the E2 visa, so that that could be very helpful for the application. And then it would also depend on like which consulate or you are applying it, or if you are applying with USCIS. Applying with USCIS has some, downsides, but the one good thing is that they don't really kind of focus on they don't really kind of like focus that the investment has to be so high. So USCIS is generally fine with kind of like lower investment amounts. And some consulates, may be fine with lower investment amounts, but there are consulates that just kind of like automatically, deny applications where the investment amount is under, $80,000 or $100,000. So I would say you just want to know at which consulate to apply, and if the investment amount is low, probably having employees in the U.S. would be really helpful. Submitting contracts with clients would be really helpful, and we would want to kind of like try to focus on to strengthen the E2 application in different areas to make it strong.
That makes sense. And in that case, it's when you would definitely want that CPA letter as well that kind of says that you've spent everything. Perfect. Excellent. So let us move on to hiring employees.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the E2 business must have either present or future capacity to hire, U.S. employees. So the immigration regulations kind of don't explicitly require that you hire U.S. employees, but the immigration regulations say that the E2 business cannot be marginal. And so marginal business is a business that kind of doesn't have capacity to earn revenue and kind of like employ anyone except you and your family members. So that's why the hiring of U.S. employees is important to prove that the business, the E2 business will not be marginal. And as we already mentioned, as a rule of thumb, generally 3 or 4 full-time employees by year 5 of operations should be sufficient to kind of renew your E2 visa application in the future. And the employees should be W-2 employees and not 1099 independent contractors. You can definitely have independent contractors, 1099 workers on top of the W-2 employees, but you should have at least 3 or 4 full-time employees by year 5 of operations. And as we already discussed, you don't have to have U.S. employees at the time you are applying for the E2 visa, but it's definitely helpful for the application. And also what we have seen recently is that if you say that you will start hiring U.S. employees, let's say in year 3 of operations, some consulates do not like that, and especially now because of COVID and the big unemployment rate. So the consulates now really want to see that you will start hiring U.S. employees in, as soon as possible. So if it's possible to hire some employees in year 1 or year 2, that will definitely be helpful for the E-2 application. And so question we often get is, how can you prove that you have U.S. employees, or that you will employ U.S. employees once you come to the U.S. on an E-2 visa? So in case you are starting a new business, then you would explain, your hiring plans in a business plan. And the business plan should have an kind of a separate section that's called, like personal plan, and that kind of describes in detail how many employees, in which year, on what positions you plan to hire in the next 5 years. And as the more detailed this section is, the better it will be for your application. Because the consulates, as I mentioned, especially nowadays, really focus on the hiring projections of U.S. employees. And in case you are purchasing an already existing business that already has U.S. employees, in that case, it's easy to demonstrate that you have the employees, because you can just submit W-2s from previous years, or pay stubs or payroll showing that you are paying the employees.
Perfect. And what I want to do is, because we're running a bit behind, so the next slide, if we could just cover it, but we could cover it very quickly. Yeah. We'll just kind of go through the highlights.
Yeah, so business plan, when you are starting a new business in the US, business plan is, extremely important part of the E-2 application, because in the business plan, you will basically explain what the company will be doing in detail, as I mentioned, how many employees you are planning to hire, how the company is planning to achieve the revenue numbers. So it is extremely important part of the E-2 application. And so to just run over some sections of the business plan. So the business plan should be generally 25 to 30 pages long, and should be really detailed, really comprehensive. And some of the most important sections of the business plan are executive summary, which is just basically a short summary of what the company will be doing. Then market analysis and research, where you will basically compare your company with the competitors and explain, why your company will be successful. Then marketing plan, where you will basically explain how you are planning to market the company and success in the market. As I mentioned already, the personal plan is a very important part of the business plan. And then the business plan should have a comprehensive financial plan. So that would mean, 5 years of revenue projections, profit and loss projections, cash flow, and balance sheet. And a common question we get from our potential clients here is whether E-2 applicants have to hire a professional to help them with the business plan. And I would say we generally advise people to hire a professional, because unless you have a background in business, or with drafting a business plan, it just may be the best that you hire a professional that will really explain how the business will succeed, will explain the financials in detail. So we generally advise people to hire a professional. And we at Scott Legal, we not only do the E-2 visas, but we also can help with drafting a business plan for E-2 visa applications.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Michaela. That was great. Perfect. Now we're going to move into E-2 visa developments and adjudication trends. And I think that is Kelly, yes.
Yes. So, all right. So, so let's talk about some developments and adjudication trends in this year. One trend, the first one we're going to talk about, Buy American, Hire American, has actually been around since April of 2017. This was an executive order that was implemented by the Trump administration with the stated purpose to create higher wages and employment rates for U.S. workers, and to protect their economic interests by enforcing and administering immigration laws. The way that that's kind of been seen in E2s is that adjudicators have started to focus more on whether money has been spent in the United States. So there is no requirement in the regulations that any of your investment has to be spent in the United States. It can be spent abroad. That's completely fine. However, we are starting to see that officers at certain consulates are asking, well, was any of your money spent in the US? So to the extent possible, many people will still purchase inventory abroad. Maybe they gift things to the business they already had. But we still think, it's a good idea to spend money in the US, particularly because this has started to be a trend, based on this new executive order. Another impact of the Buy American, Hire American has been that it's been a little bit more difficult for E2 employees to get approved. So, just basically, for executives, managers, essential employees that are going to come over on an E2, they want to be convinced that there isn't a US worker that could do this job. And I think in light of COVID and the unemployment rate, that's gotten even, more rigorous. So another thing to mention, obviously, is what is going to be the impact of the Biden-Harris administration on the E2 visa. And given the fact that E2 visa adjudications really weren't impacted that much under the Trump administration, especially compared to other types of visas that saw significant changes over the years, we really don't see necessarily any real big changes to the E2 E2 visa program under the Biden-Harris administration. So I think we're not really anticipating any major changes. Things continued relatively smoothly for E2 visas in particular under the Trump administration. And we anticipate that will continue under the Biden-Harris administration.
Because one very kind of interesting thing about E2 visas, which I didn't, you'd think that the approval rate may be a little lower, but the government published approval rate for E2 visas is in 2019 was 89%. So that's they are, most E2 visas are approved. So.
Exactly. So one more recent kind of adjudication trend and development has been just changes to consular processing, due to the pandemic. So it used to be at many consulates, for example, the ones we process at a lot in Toronto and also in London, there was a very orderly, timely process. In Toronto, you could submit an application, you would get a response in 10 days, then you'd be able to book an appointment perhaps within 1 to 3 weeks and then get your visa. In London, similarly, they had, maybe 30 days, then you could get an appointment within a few weeks. So all of that has changed this year because of the pandemic. Just the timelines are much more complicated now. Consulates all shut down uniformly in March and then began opening on an ad hoc post by post basis from late July onwards. Given rising COVID cases in Europe and also, elsewhere around the world, we're now seeing posts are going back to canceling appointments. Some posts have now canceled appointments through the end of the year. So it's just something to be aware of when you're thinking about the timeline and processing at a consulate, that just the timelines are no longer what they were. And because consulates are also working through a backlog of what happened earlier this year, you have to build in that time that it may take longer to actually get your appointment at the consulate. And additionally, you want to take into account, are you in a country where there's currently a travel ban? If there is, then you'll also need something called the national interest exception. So the process has just become a bit more complicated than it used to be. Another thing to consider just is that, for example, previously, if you were in the US, you could go to certain consulates in Canada, maybe Mexico. Because of COVID, that may no longer be the case. For example, Canada has barred, the vast majority of people who are not Canadians from entering. And so even though the consulate may give you an appointment, you may not be able to enter Canada because the country may not allow you in. All right, perfect. So let's move on to some issues and complex areas that we see for E2 visas. So one, I think Michaela touched on earlier, which is the source and trail of funds. And particularly we want to talk about this for USCIS filings. So there's 2 ways to file an E2 visa. One is at a consulate abroad, where you're going in front of a consular officer and presenting your application. And the other is from within the United States, where you're actually submitting something to US Immigration Services. If you're submitting from within the United States, they really require for source of funds a dollar for dollar accounting of that money. That means that at a consulate, if you're if you're utilizing a gift, you might be able to just present a gift letter from the person giving you the gift, proof of where they got the money, perhaps a couple of years of their tax returns if it was personal savings, and then proof of them transferring that money to you. If you're in the United States and you're filing with USCIS, they may not accept just that documentation. Besides the tax returns, they may also want to see the person's bank statements, perhaps going back quite a ways, showing that they had enough money and accumulated over the years. So it's just to say that if you're filing with USCIS and you have a particularly complicated source of funds, you may want to try to consider another venue, because it can be very, very difficult if you're not able to trace exactly where each dollar came from. This is not the case at consulates. At consulates, generally, if you're able to meet, I'd say they're more reasonable about the standard of evidence, which is, more likely than not that the money came from a particular place. Then it's a more straightforward process, but it can be quite difficult depending on if you have a complicated source of funds.
Kelly, a question that came in has to do with if someone was in the U.S. and they couldn't leave, they have a visa, they were in the U.S. and they couldn't leave to go renew their visa, and they did a USCIS filing. What would they have to do, or are there any issues associated with that?
Sure. Yeah. So if you already have your E-2 visa, you're in the U.S., you want to extend your I-94 essentially. Unfortunately, the consulates and USCIS do kind of treat the applications as brand new. So the fact that you had an E-2 visa in the past, it's helpful for you, but USCIS will probably want to see all of the documentation that you submitted to get your initial E-2 visa. The focus should be on, what has the company's progress been? What are the tax returns? What are the W-2s? But they likely, in our experience, they will also ask to see what is the proof of investment? What is the source of funds? And if they take issue with that, they could also come back and issue a request for evidence and ask for more information on that.
Perfect. No, that's good. That's great, because we've had a number of those because of COVID. We've had to do a number of them, and it's interesting. Applications that were easily approved at the consulate, and we have very significant concerns as to whether USCIS would approve it based on the source of funds, because it's. And Kelly, I think we can skip over the small investment amount just because we talked about that quite a bit.
Yep. Sounds good. Right. And so then E-2s for two investors, we just bring this up to say we have many people that come, they want to do business partnerships. That's completely fine. If you both want to be investors, as Michaela mentioned, it has to be, at least 50% ownership. So if it's two of you, it needs to be 50-50. And then as well, you need to be prepared to perhaps invest some more money. Like if you have a $60,000 investment, it's split between two people, that's really going to be too low. You need to, look into investing more than that. Substantive changes to business after filing. So this is an issue that can come up. It's just good to know that when you submit your application to the consulate, you're basically telling them, this is the company I'm going to run. So if you're saying I'm going to run a restaurant, then that's the business that you're going to run. If after you start running the restaurant, you decide, what, I want to, sell the restaurant and start producing farm equipment, you can't just go ahead and do that without going back to the consulate or back to USCIS and getting approval for it. If there is a small change to the business, so you're running a restaurant and you want to purchase a second restaurant under the same LLC or corporation, there's really no problem there. That's not going to be considered a substantive change because it's the same line of business. But any kind of significant changes to what you're doing that weren't contemplated in your initial business plan or application, you want to make sure that you're going back to USCIS or the consulate, or at the very least discussing with your attorney, before you go ahead and make any changes. Otherwise, you could run into issues.
Oh, that sounds great. And one thing I just wanted to, someone had a question earlier, it was actually closer to the beginning of the presentation, but I think it's relevant here. So I'm just going to quickly answer it. Is the question was, I believe, if I have a gas station, what if I want to open a gas station and also run an IT business? So if you're initially, well, actually, I'll let you, Kelly, what would do? Because we've done a couple cases like that. I think the one I'm thinking of was a coffee shop and IT business. But
right. Yes. So it is possible. Like it is possible to have these disparate businesses under one, corporation or LLC. The thing is that you have to contemplate it when you submit your initial business plan to the consulate, and then you're also setting yourself up for them to say, okay, well, if you're going to run these both initially, you need to invest enough that you have invested all the money that's needed to both start the coffee shop and run the IT business, or to both, start the gas station and run the IT business. So it is possible to do both of those things, but it does have to be contemplated in your initial plan and submitted to the consulate.
Oh, great, thank you.
Perfect. And then in terms of family business purchases, so one other thing on substantive changes is just that you cannot let your ownership fall below 50%. So it's just very important. Some people don't realize, especially if it's the type of company where they're going to raise capital or the ownership structure is going to change, the company always has to be 50% owned by treaty country nationals. And if you are the investor, it always has to be 50% owned by you. And if that ownership structure changes, that can change your eligibility. So even if you have a 5-year visa, if you sell enough of the company that you're no longer at least 50% or a majority owner, now your visa is no longer valid. So then quickly on family business purchases. So this is just to say that when you purchase a business and it's, not two objective, unrelated parties, there's going to be more scrutiny on it. And you may want to get a valuation or some kind of accountant letter or some objective valuation so that they feel comfortable that the amount of money that you're actually paying for the business is really the fair market value. So if you have tax returns that show, the equity or assets of a company are at kind of, 5 million and you're paying 50,000 for a 75% share, you need to have an explanation for that. They may not be convinced that that's really fair market value for the business.
Perfect.
All right. So common reasons for E-2 denials. So one is, low investment amount. I think we've spoken about this, a few different times. I think if you are denied for this reason, a benefit is that if you do have access to more capital, you can always just spend more and reapply. There's nothing that stops you from reapplying. You can also gather more industry evidence to support that the investment amount is substantial. So sometimes you can get a CPA to evaluate your business plan or to look at your, your investments and say, I work with small companies and I'm comfortable that, this is enough to get this business up and running. So another is the nature of the business. So this is just to say some businesses are riskier than others. If you're buying an established business that has 3 years of tax returns and lots of W-2s showing that it's been able to make money and have employees, they're going to feel more comfortable with that. If you have a consulting business that's really kind of a one-man startup, they're going to want more, to be convinced that this is really going to be able to earn money in the U.S. So it's more important that you have, proof of contracts, proof of letters of intent, and a real strong business plan so that they're convinced that, they should, kind of take a chance on this business. So for filing location, some consulates are more friendly than others. As we mentioned, we file a lot in Toronto and London, some other consulates in Europe as well. Some of them are very familiar with E-2s. That means they have a process, they have a system, they're generally familiar with the regulations. Other places are more difficult. There are some consulates where they just don't do any E-2s and they're not familiar. Sometimes that can work for an applicant if they can, convince them that they meet the requirements. But there are some that are just more hostile to the E-2 process. Additionally, if you're filing with USCIS, there can be some downsides there as well. Sometimes they take a more unreasonable stance when it comes to the documentation needed for the source and trail of funds and go kind of far above and beyond, the standard of more likely than not that something is true. So if you have a source of funds that goes back years and years and years and you can't really document it, the USCIS may not be the right venue for you. So another reason for denial is concern over whether your business is going to create US jobs. So for example, let's say if you ran a business in your country for several years and you didn't hire anybody, can be a real red flag. So in those types of situations, we often will recommend to people that they hire an employee before they submit the petition. It's not required, but we think it can kind of help answer this concern. So another reason can be issues with the adjudicating officer. I'd say by and large, the officers that our clients deal with and that we deal with are, very professional. However, you do get officers that have already decided when you show up that they, don't want to approve the petition. They didn't like it for some reason. And the officer does have complete discretion over whether to grant your visa or not. There's no appeal process. So you do want to, if you're having an issue with a particular officer, you want to just be as polite as possible, try to get information on what they were unhappy with. and you can always reapply. And most consulates will make an effort for you to see a different consular officer. It's not guaranteed by any means, but it is something that that you can ask for, and that many consulates will try to accommodate. And then the other, the last reason is, you didn't meet the requirements at the time of filing. So, sometimes we have clients that have come to us after a denial. And for example, we had a client that, had 100,000 to invest. They spent 2,000 and put 98,000 in a business bank account. So, when they went to the interview, the officer said, you haven't invested a substantial amount. Once they came to us, we were able to explain, here's what we think, you should invest, and here's things you could spend money on. And then ultimately they were approved. All right.
And we're doing well on time because we have only one slide left before we get to the questions. So we'll spend 5 minutes on the slide and then have 10 minutes for questions, which should be enough time for me to get through the 20 or so questions that we have. Many of them we've been answering during the presentation. So great.
All right. So E-2 renewals. So let's see. The biggest thing when you're going to renew an E-2 visa is they're going to want to see, did you hire US workers, and, did your company, kind of do what it said it was going to do? What did the tax returns look like? What does the financial data look like? So, some consulates, in fact, for renewals will only ask to see your W-2s and your tax returns, which shows that really the most important thing they want to see is were jobs created. If your industry is one that's largely based on paying independent contractors, sometimes we can include 1099s, particularly if there's, hundreds of thousands of dollars being paid to kind of subcontractors and things like that. That can be helpful. That being said, it does weaken your case if you don't have any W-2 employees. Something we're seeing with COVID is obviously maybe people had employees in the past, and they had to let them go. There's kind of an ebb and flow that can happen with employees over the years, particularly if you have a 5-year visa. So one thing we try to do is also just focus on, did the company hire US workers historically? So, if the company over the years has employed people, in good jobs and has had, 10 employees, but right now maybe it only has 2 because of COVID, that's something that, that can be addressed when you do your renewal. But I think that, if you haven't hired any workers, getting a renewal is going to be very, very difficult. It's just something, in order to show that the company is not marginal and supports more than just you and your family, you do have to show that you've hired employees. So the other is, your financial data. So did you meet your revenue targets? Are you profitable? Do you have, like did your marketing and sales plan work? In terms of meeting your targets, I'd say that, when you submit business plans, consulates know that these are just projections. It's guesswork that's based on research. So if your company didn't meet its revenue targets, but it's still doing well. So if you projected you were going to make 600,000, but your company made 300,000, that's okay, as long as the company has still been able to hire US workers, and continue to operate. Similarly, it's good if the company is profitable, but if the company is running a small loss, again, it's not that big of a deal as long as the cash flow is still positive and you can still, pay your workers. And then as well, you want to be able to show that you're still kind of in the line of business you said you were in, and that you're doing well. So you also want to provide proof the company is real and operating. So if you have the type of business where people are reviewing you online, really positive reviews can always be added. If you have the type of business that's really in a heavily regulated industry, you want to make sure you're including all the proof of the updated licenses. Most companies now will have websites. You can, include proof of that. And if you have any really large or impressive contracts, you can always obviously redact all the confidential information and include proof of that, as well as, an excerpt of bank statement showing that the company is actually, taking in money and engaging in commercial transactions. And then in terms of, the last important requirement is, do you still meet the E-2 requirements? So you don't have to show any new investment. Your investment, was sorted out in the beginning when they approved you. But if there's been any ownership changes, so as we discussed, your ownership can't go below 50%, or the ownership of the company cannot drop beneath 50% for, of treaty country nationals owning the company. And then similarly, the changes to the type of business. So, if your business, let's say you had a marketing company that said, my niche is going to be healthcare, but and ultimately your niche turned out to be finance. things like that are completely fine. You're still providing the marketing services you said you were going to provide. But if the business has really, really changed a significant amount, then that could be difficult. So that's something you really want to address, kind of before you get to the renewal stage, and talk with an attorney to figure out, should I go back to the consulate and get this approved before I start this new business line?
Perfect. Kelly, two questions that came in. One is like if someone reaches the 3 or 4 full-time employees and then they go for their second renewal, do they have to have more employees? That's the first question. And then the second question has to do with, like, do they have to go to an interview when they do the renewal?
So for the first question, I think no, like it's not a requirement that you continue to level up on the number of employees for the E2 as long as you have employees. But it certainly is helpful for your application if you do have more employees. In terms of renewing, do you have to go in for an interview? That's consulate specific. So there are some consulates that have what are called interview waiver programs. This has been slightly expanded under COVID. So there are some consulates that will allow you to send in your documents, and then they'll send you back your passport with the visa. Usually you do have to be in the country for that to work. However, I'd say our experience is that even consulates that allow interview waivers for E2 visas, our experience is by and large, yes, you do have to go for an interview. They tend not to, even ones that have interview waiver programs tend not to extend the interview waiver to E2 visa holders. So it's just very dependent on where you're applying.
Oh, that makes sense. And I agree. That's definitely been our experience. I was very, very fortunate when I renewed that they didn't make me come for an interview. I was able to send in my passport, but I think it was just probably because they were so sick and tired of seeing our applications in Toronto. So they they just decided, oh, we don't want to see him. So we'll just renew without him coming. But I agree. It's something that, even though there are programs out there, it seems that consulates are not that they're somewhat reluctant to abide by them. Perfect. Okay, so now let's do this. We have questions, and some of them we've gone through, but I think that we still have almost 10 minutes. So let's go here. Okay, so how do you handle at-risk funds in cases that have low startup costs, like tech startup, primarily remote workers? In some cases, there are not a lot of costs. Okay, so and some of them I'll just quickly answer. So the fact is if you have a consultancy business or a low cost business, the E2 still requires you to spend money. So when I got my E2, I was fortunate in that I didn't have to spend that much money, and it was still approved. But these days you do, even though it's a business that, if you were starting a consulting business, it wouldn't be necessary to have a lease or to spend $40,000. But we do recommend it because we do recommend it because officers are often not swayed by the argument that this business is a business that only requires a laptop and a desk. Unfortunately, they're just not swayed by it. So we talked about the loan already. Part-time, full-time employees we talked about. Yeah, so I want to start, this one is an interesting one, and Kelly was talking about some of the risky businesses. I want to start a real estate business. I was on a TN legally. I cannot sell, so how can I start it? I do have my license already. So Kelly, why don't you take that one? And there are a few things going on there, but the question is, I want to start a real estate business. So let's talk about it. I'm not sure what type, but let's talk about it in terms of a home flipping business, because that's an interesting one that we often get.
Right. So real estate businesses are another one that are really heavily scrutinized. Consulates do not like them. They do not like the idea of home flipping unless you're doing it on a massive scale. So to give you an example, we had a client that, was purchasing 30, 40 homes at a time and flipping them, and then also provided property management services. Those are the types of businesses that you can do on real estate. But oftentimes you're going to struggle with, especially if it's home flipping, they're going to say, is this really an active business, or are you just kind of a passive investor? You own a home and then, you own an asset, you're selling an asset. So those are, I'd say, inherently tricky businesses. The minute an officer sees that it's connected to real estate, they're going to be, looking at it more closely than other applications.
Exactly. And we had, just to contrast two situations, we had one person who applied on his own. He bought one house, went to a consulate in Germany, and he was denied, right? They said it's not a business. But we had an approval. This what a different client, we had an approval where the client had over 50 homes, and they obtained the E2 visa as a result of that. So the next question is, yeah, so this has been answered. So I think it may have been a question that came before we got to these slides. So I'm just going to read it, but then I'm just going to answer it again. Is it a requirement that purchase be made in the US, or that the clients are in the US? What if we purchase equipment from abroad? So this came under a little later in the presentation under Buy American, Hire American. The regulations are very clear that you can actually purchase things abroad. They're explicit and that say that the purchases don't have to be made in America. But however, the Buy American, Hire American, there's a preamble that says that everything within the regulation should be adjudicated in the spirit of this. So consular officers, we highly recommend that people make their purchases in the U.S. The majority of them, if not all, but we highly recommend that. I'm an Indian citizen. How do I get an E2 visa? So I'm just going to take this one. So E2 visas are specific to countries. India is not one of the treaty countries. We do have a client from India right now that has purchased citizenship in Grenada, and Grenada is an E2 treaty country, and we're doing an E2 for that client based on that. We're in the process of doing it at this very minute. So we're doing an E2 for that client. So that's how someone from India could get an E2. We answered the gas station IT, line of credit. Yeah, will we share the slides? Yes, we will. Okay, so this one, okay. Do you apply for an E2 visa in the US or from your home country? So I think this is probably one that came earlier before we went through this, but maybe just it is something that comes up often. So maybe Kelly, just the what are some of the, like, things we think of when applying for where we apply, USCIS or home country?
Sure. So we almost always recommend that people apply in their home country, kind of for the reasons we discussed earlier. USCIS is really unforgiving about the source of funds. Another reason we recommend people apply in their home country is that most of the time you can get the visa for, several years, up to 5 years. And so if you go to a consulate, you're actually getting a visa stamp in your passport that is valid for, for 5 years. And then every time you enter the US and you travel, you can get 2 years in E2 status. If you're applying from within the United States, you're not getting a visa. All you're doing is changing your status to E2 status. And you can get up to 2 years, but you can't travel outside the US. So once you leave the US, you would actually have to go to a consulate and get the visa stamp, and you're submitting a brand new application. It's not like it is with an H or an L visa where you're getting a USCIS approval and that matters at the consulate. For the E2, the USCIS approval does not matter at the consulate. It's a brand new application at the consulate.
Excellent. No, that sounds great. Some quick questions I'm going to quickly dispose of. So how do you get from a green card from an E2? There's a webinar that we're doing next week on that. So we were going to send you information on that, so you can sign up for that to get answers to that. Is there premium processing for E2 petition? So if you file within the US through USCIS, yes. Otherwise at a consulate, no. But that being said, absent COVID, most consulates don't take that long to adjudicate E2 visa applications. There must be a physical location. This is an interesting one, and I'm just going to deal with it very quickly. So I think the question is, do you need a lease? So we highly recommend that people get a lease, but there was a change that was made to the regulations very recently within the last several months, which made it clear that a lease was not absolutely required. But it also said that it can be helpful in the adjudication of an application. We still feel that consular officers find that having a lease shows them that the client is very serious with respect to the business. I spent approximately 50,000 already setting up the business. These have been in tax submissions and have included all areas. Yeah, so I'm not sure. It's someone who spent $50,000 on a number of different things, but the first thing they mentioned is tax submission. So I'm not really sure what that is. But generally speaking, the other things you mentioned are fine. Legal, marketing, flights, no. Accommodations, no. So we have a blog post on our website that talks about good E2 expenditures and expenditures that aren't so good. So just email us and we'll point you in the right direction to that. perfect. And someone's writing about law firms. We have actually done quite a few E2 visas for law firms. So both USCIS and consular filings. So happy to help you with that. I submitted an application in London today. Yeah. So what's the estimated time scale? Unfortunately, we don't know. It's really up in the air with respect to, because what's happening is as a city shuts down, then the consulate slows down or shuts down completely. Can we reapply at a different consulate? So because we have a minute left, I'm just going to deal with it quickly. So in order to apply at a particular consulate, you have to be permitted to apply there. So each consulate has a list of rules of who is permitted to apply there. So for example, if someone is in the US on a valid visa, even if they're not Canadian, they can apply for an E2 visa at the US consulate in Toronto, absent COVID, right? They can do that. So, but each consulate is going to have those rules. So but generally speaking, if you live in a country, you applied and you were denied, it's going to be very difficult to find another consulate to apply at. It is not home flipping. I'm not sure what that means. If it's a question.
I think it's related to what we were talking about earlier with the real estate.
Oh yeah,
it's just a follow up on that. I think that any real estate business is something we kind of have to talk about in more detail, just because they are such highly scrutinized businesses. It's
exactly. And that might be a good idea for a webinar on real estate E2s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so someone is asking about pricing. You can write to us directly. It's more specifics on someone's asking about specifics about the Granada citizenship. So again, write to us separately. Yeah, about timing at a consulate. Again, we don't know. In Toronto, we don't know. Yeah, this is a question I did see earlier and I want to answer. What if you entered the lottery for a green card? Will that affect your chances? So the answer is no, it won't. So it's so speculative, right? I'm on an E2 visa and I regularly apply for the green card lottery. So it's so speculative that I think that if you win, we've actually even had people that applied for the E2 visa when they had won the lottery, but they were later in numbers, so they needed the visa earlier. And even in that was one instance. Even in that instance, the E2 is approved, even though the officer knew that the person was going to be eligible for the green card 7 or 8 months later. Okay, have you had any clients from South Africa? Yes, Italian passport. I can't recall which passport, but South Africa is not a treaty country, but Italy is. So, and then the very last question I'll answer, what about a construction business? A lot of the home flipping businesses, they're positioned as construction or home renovation businesses, and those have been very successful. But anyway, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, Michaela and Kelly. It was great. I think you provided the group with excellent information. Again, we're going to send you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, a copy of the free E2 visa guide, and information related to how you can sign up for the future webinars. And the next webinar is in 1 week on December 10th, and it's moving from an E2 to a green card. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, have a good day.